Welcome to Corvette Today, the show that talks about everything Corvette, with your host, Steve Garrett, lifetime member of the National Corvette Museum, president of the Corvette Club of Kansas City, Missouri, and radio disc jockey at the #1 radio station in Kansas City for over 45 years. Here's Steve Garrett.
Thanks for listening and watching Corvette Today, the show that talks about everything Corvette, and the only current podcast dedicated to Corvette. I'm your host, Steve Garrett. I appreciate you tuning in. Corvette Today is brought to you by Wheelcraft. Want to dress up your Corvette with bright chrome or black chrome wheels? Visit wheelcraft.com and learn about their advanced PVD chrome finishing. They can refinish your wheels or offer a wheel exchange for most models, and it comes with a 5-year warranty. Visit wheelcraft.com today or call them at 833-840-5334. You can listen to Corvette Today on all podcast platforms. You can also listen on your smart device. Just say, "Hey Google," or "Alexa, play the podcast called Corvette Today," and you're connected. And be sure to visit the Corvette Today website. It's CorvetteToday.com. You can access everything there, including the Corvette Today merchandise store. You can also join our Corvette Today Facebook group there as well. Also, make sure you sign up for the Corvette Today emails, notifications, and updates at CorvetteToday.ck.page. And if you like YouTube, be sure to subscribe to our Corvette Today YouTube channel. See all Corvette Today episodes on YouTube as well. And be sure to patronize our flagship sponsors of Corvette Today, MidEngineCorvetteForum.com, the forum that focuses on the new mid-engine C8 Corvette. Meet a lot of fellow Corvette enthusiasts like yourself at MidEngineCorvetteForum.com. Soul Performance Products. Developed and manufactured in the United States, the Soul Performance Products exhaust portfolio has been tailored to elevate the experience of the world's most exciting sports cars, including the latest generation of the Corvette. Soul Performance Products at SOULPP.com, the official performance exhaust of Corvette Today. Aerolarri Wheels, a true forged wheel with over 20 unique styles to choose from for your C8 and wide-body versions of the C7, C6, and C5 Corvette. It's an amazing value, starting at only $23.88 for a set of 4 fully forged wheels. And use the promo code CT111 and get $100 off your purchase. Visit Aerolarri.com. That's AEROLARRI.com. And use the promo code CT111 for your $100 discount. Ciocca Corvettes. If you're a Corvette enthusiast, and I know you are since you're listening and watching Corvette Today, then you need to know about Ciocca Corvette. They're based in Atlantic City, where you can find over 100 new and pre-owned vets on the lot and inbound. Ciocca also ships Corvettes all over the country, custom ordered to your specifications. They're staffed with experienced pros who can answer all your questions. So don't compromise. Visit CioccaCorvette.com. That's CIOCCA Corvette.com and find out more. Chevrolet. Together, let's drive. E5 Wheels. E5 Wheels is a passionate and dedicated wheel company that serves only Corvette. They make spun-forged wheels for your C8, C7, and C6 Corvette. With the best fitment in the industry, E5 Wheels ensures your wheels complement the aesthetics and functionality while optimizing the performance of your Corvette. Visit e5wheels.com or call them at 305-964-7429. And a shout out to Canadian Corvette Forum and Corvette Forum, welcoming Corvette enthusiasts from around the world. When we talk about the 1960 Le Mans race, we usually talk about Briggs Cunningham's 3 Corvettes that raced that year. What you may not know is there was a 4th Corvette that raced at Le Mans in 1960, the Camoradi Corvette. My guest on today's show will talk about that 4th Corvette. Please welcome back with me to Corvette Today, the official photographer for Corvette Racing and a friend of mine and a friend of the show, Richard Prince. Richard, welcome back to Corvette Today, buddy.
Thank you, Steve. As always, it's truly my pleasure and my privilege to be here with you. I know I speak for the entire Corvette community everywhere when I say that we really sincerely appreciate all that you do for the hobby.
Buddy, it's a labor of love. And before we get into the show, congratulations to you on getting voted into the Corvette Hall of Fame.
Well, thank you very much. That is really a humbling honor. particularly because it results from multiple rounds of balloting, and the people who do the voting are sourced from throughout the entire Corvette world, from the Corvette hobby, from Corvette businesses, and from General Motors. So it is really appreciated that I've been recognized in that way. And as I said, it's also very humbling.
It's a huge congratulations to you, my friend. I am elated, and I will be able to be there for that honor to see you get inducted. All right, Richard, let's start with this. Let's talk about the Camoradi Corvette. It all started out with Lloyd Lucky Casner. Talk about him to begin the show.
Well, he is one of those epic characters from days gone by. It seems like, for whatever reason, racing in general and sports car racing in particular attracted these kind of larger-than-life figures, and he certainly fits that mold. He was born in New York City in 1928 and went to the University of Miami, graduated in 1950 with a business administration degree. But he had a burning interest in flying, so after college he went through flight training and he got his pilot's license and went to work for Pan American Airways as a pilot, and he continued doing that until 1954. He was flying a South American route, and they intended to change his route, so he had to fly transatlantic, and he didn't want to do it, and he had other interests. So he quit being an airline pilot and went into the car business. He opened up a Cadillac dealership in Miami, sold new and used Cadillacs, and did reasonably well at that. And that helped fund his entree into what he really wanted to do, which was sports car racing. He got involved in sports car racing in the mid-50s. That led to the car that you mentioned, among many others, and really an incredible story altogether about his racing activities and his team. One of the more interesting things about him was he wanted to go racing in a really big way and couldn't afford to fund it himself, so he had to look to others for funding. And by all accounts, one of his most important skills was the ability to convince other people to bend to his will, to do what he wanted. My favorite example of that is, at one point, he convinced the Dow Chemical Company, which at that time was the world's largest manufacturer of automotive antifreeze, to be the primary sponsor of his racing team. And at the time, his racing team had two cars, and they were both air-cooled Porsches. He managed to talk the largest maker of automotive antifreeze into sponsoring his air-cooled Porsches, and that pretty much sums up Lucky Casner's, perhaps his greatest skill in motor racing, which was, again, to convince anybody to do anything.
Yeah, now I know Lucky started Casner Motor Racing in 1959, and in its abbreviated form, which was Camoradi, that sounded Italian, which was really good because all the high-end racing teams were owned and subsidized by wealthy, connected individuals like that, wasn't it?
Yeah, this was, of course, the era long before corporate involvement really got involved in a very, very big way. So a lot of the more memorable, more successful sports car racing teams were funded by very wealthy sportsmen who simply wanted to go racing. That included, of course, Briggs Cunningham and Lance Raventlow with the Scarabs. So Lloyd kind of fell into that mold, except, again, he didn't have the great wealth to fund it himself. He managed to talk others into doing it. And one of his many ploys for doing that was forming a race team that just had the sound of aristocracy, of old European involvement. Camoradi stood for Casner Motor Racing, the sound of an old Italian enterprise, and he presumed that that would help him sell it.
Yeah, and his goal was really to race in Europe, and more specifically Le Mans, wasn't that right?
Yes, at an SCCA event in March of 1959 that was held on a temporary circuit at Opa-locka Naval Air Base in Miami, he grabbed the announcer's microphone, announced the formation of Camoradi, and invited those present to become, quote, members of his team. And what he was asking for was people to join the team and pay the team membership fee, which he would use to go big-time racing in Europe. The humorous part of that is he was speaking to a population of racers. It was an SCCA national, and he was speaking to people who would have loved to go racing in Europe if they could afford it.
Right.
And he was asking them to fund his race team to go to Europe. So he was met with more than a little bit of ridicule when he made this announcement, but there was one person in the audience who thought this was a fantastic idea. He saw it as an epic adventure, and he approached Lucky after Lucky made that announcement and and made a proposal to him. That man was Fred Gamble, and Fred proposed that he would volunteer to help this program, help get it off the ground, and he would travel at his own expense, he offered, travel with the team throughout Europe, and as a journalist, which is what Fred was at the time, he would raise a little bit of money to help fund his way by writing a series of articles for car magazines about the team's efforts.
Yeah, and with Fred on board, he was able to secure Goodyear as a sponsor, which opened the door to other sponsors like Chevrolet.
Yes, Lucky saw something magical in Fred, and he, on the spot, said, I have a better idea. Why don't you partner with me on this, and together we can make this thing happen. And Fred was in his mid-20s, a racing enthusiast, a recent college grad with a journalism degree. He was the perfect balance to Lucky Casner, who was really a wild man. He was out there, and Fred Gamble was highly intelligent and very measured, and it was just a perfect marriage, the two of them working together. Fred, over the next several weeks, wrote a very comprehensive proposal that Lucky could then take to potential sponsors. Goodyear was, as you said, the first to sign on with that. And once Lucky had Goodyear, that became a selling point for additional corporate sponsors. It created certainly the illusion that this was a well-established program and was on its way when a big global company like Goodyear Tire and Rubber was involved with it.
Yeah. Buddy, let's take our first break. When we come back, we're going to talk more about racing with Camoradi Corvettes. That's coming up next on Corvette Today.
We all know that wheels make the car. Wheelcraft's PVD chrome finish in bright chrome or black chrome will take your Corvette to new levels. And it comes with a 5-year warranty. Durability is a defining feature of the Wheelcraft finish. Their PVD chrome is superior to traditional chrome with a finish that is brake dust resistant and cleans effortlessly with soap and water. Wheelcraft offers factory wheel exchange for select C4 through C8 models, or they can apply the PVD finish to your current wheels. No matter what generation you own, Wheelcraft will transform the look of your Corvette. With every Corvette comes a unique story, and Wheelcraft has embraced this idea. When you purchase your new set of wheels, you receive a lifetime membership to the Wheelcraft Pit Crew, granting you access to your own page on Wheelcraft's website, where you can post pictures and tell your Corvette story. Visit our website at wheelcraft.com or call 833-639-4231. Arrive in style with Wheelcraft.
The National Corvette Restorer Society is celebrating its 50th anniversary this year. 50 years of affirming and promoting the preservation and restoration of the Corvette. 50 years as the foremost Corvette collector car organization for building value with its prestigious awards. Have you ever considered joining NCRS? Over 70,000 people have. We're so much more than just the nuts and bolts. The NCRS flight judging program can and often does increase the value of America's sports car by researching and publishing the leading tech manuals and judging guides for the 1953 through 2007 Corvettes, by training the best judges and by hosting local, regional, and national judging events. And when you join, you'll get award-winning magazines like Corvette Restorer and Driveline all throughout the year. Joining is simple and easy. Just go to ncrs.org and sign up. There are NCRS chapters all throughout the U.S. and all around the world. Chances are there's a local chapter near you. So join NCRS today at ncrs.org. We come for the Corvettes. We stay for the friendships made along the way.
When you want to buy a Corvette, or any Chevrolet for that matter, get yours from Hendrick Chevrolet Shawnee Mission, located in Kansas City. Hendrick Chevrolet is the largest Corvette dealership and showroom in the Midwest. With a knowledgeable sales staff and Corvette sales specialists on hand, they'll help you build the Corvette of your dreams, and they ship nationwide. With Corvette certified master mechanics on site and a huge parts department with over 24,000 parts and $2 million in inventory, Hendrick Chevrolet is well equipped to take care of your every need. From sales to service to collision repair, Hendrick Chevrolet has you covered. Visit ChevyUSA.com or call 913-384-1550.
This is the Corvette Today podcast with Steve Garrett.
Thanks for checking out Corvette Today on podcast and YouTube. It's the only current podcast dedicated to Corvette. Corvette Today is brought to you by Wheelcraft. You want your Corvette looking its best, don't you? Well, dress it up with bright chrome or black chrome wheels. Visit wheelcraft.com and learn about their advanced PVD chrome finishing. They can refinish your wheels or do a wheel exchange, and you get a 5-year warranty too. So visit wheelcraft.com today or give them a call, 833 639-4231. I'm your host, Steve Garrett. With me is my buddy and the official photographer of Corvette Racing, Richard Prince. We're talking about the Camoradi Corvette that raced at Le Mans in 1960. Richard, Casner got Corvette to sign up with GM's general manager, Ed Cole, which is a big deal, and with Zora Arkus-Duntov. Now, he received two 1960 Corvettes. Let's talk about those two Corvettes that were given to Camoradi Racing.
Sure. Yes, in the summer of 1959, Lucky Casner met with Ed Cole and Zora Duntov, and at the time, Zora's title was Chevrolet Director of High Performance. He was not yet called the Chief Engineer, but he obviously was the point person for all things Corvette. Chevrolet agreed to provide Lucky Casner and Camoradi with two brand new, completely competition-ready Corvettes. So they had the high-compression, solid-lifter fuel injection engines, four-speed transmissions, posi rear, heavy-duty brake and suspension, and they were equipped initially with the regular production option 24-gallon fuel tanks. Because Chevrolet was still committed to the June 1957 AMA ban on all forms of motorsport, they had to phrase the relationship in a different way, as was often the case back then. Chevrolet was providing those cars through a Miami dealership called Don Allen Chevrolet to Camoradi Racing, and with the cars came a contract through Don Allen Chevrolet for heavy-duty field test and development. So Camoradi was not, quote, racing the cars. They were running the cars through the ringer and providing feedback to Chevrolet on what parts needed to be strengthened, what could be done to improve the cars. So that's how that all got going. Those cars were delivered at the very beginning of 1960. The first outing was at Daytona International Speedway, where the cars would just run through a shakedown. I believe that was an SCCA event at Daytona. And then in February of 1960, both cars were loaded on a ship and sent to Havana, Cuba, for what was then called the Gran Premio de la Habana, which was a race that attracted top competitors from America, South America, Central America, and even Europe. It was the final race in Havana because of the revolution that had just taken place. So there was one more race, February of 1960, and Camoradi brought his top drivers and the whole team there. Jim Jeffords drove one of those cars to the win in the all-GT race, which was, as the name implies, a race for Gran Turismo production sports cars. Jeffords drove the same car to 8th overall in the main event, first in GT class, but 8th overall against purpose-built sports racing cars, more like prototypes, as we would call them today. So it was a great success for the team. They were really off to a fabulous start. The cars and the spares and all the equipment came back to the U.S., and preparations were made for the next outing, which took place in March in the central Florida city of Sebring. So they were going to Sebring for the 12-hour race in 1960. That was the second outing for the cars.
And Jeffords had some really good teammates like Dan Gurney, Carroll Shelby, Sterling Moss.
Well, that's another kind of interesting and humorous part of the Lucky Casner story. As part of his fantastic salesmanship, he, at the beginning, when the team was being created, he represented that his team included some of the top driving talent of the era. And he had a long list that included, as you said, besides Jim Jeffords, Dan Gurney, Carroll Shelby, Sterling Moss, Maston Gregory, Jim Rathman, who had just won the Indy 500,
wow,
etc. And I could find no evidence that this incredible roster of drivers was actually, at that time, contracted to Camoradi, but it certainly lent a certain air of credibility to the team. So Lucky Casner could go into a meeting with Ed Cole, general manager of Chevrolet, and Zora Duntov and say, this is what we intend to do, and this is who we are. We have this incredible roster of drivers, Goodyear Tire and Rubber is our primary sponsor, etc. And there was no question about it. You can have two Corvettes. And Lucky Casner more or less did the same thing with Maserati and became the de facto representative for Maserati, racing Maserati birdcage prototypes alongside the Corvettes, both in America and in Europe. So yes, the list of drivers was an important part of the story.
And then came Le Mans. Let's talk about that race and how Camoradi Racing did at Le Mans with that Corvette.
Well, let me just explain how they ended up at Le Mans with one Corvette. They intended to race two Corvettes at Le Mans throughout the entire season in Europe. Unfortunately, Sebring was an interesting outing for them. The two cars were entered, and one car had the lead drivers that included Jim Jeffords again. The other car was more or less a backup car. At the very beginning of the race, the Jeffords car was damaged. Likely something in the valve train was damaged, and the car would not rev over 5,000 RPM, so it was down on speed. The other car was being driven by Fred Gamble, the same Fred Gamble who helped launch the program, and he was the team manager at that point. He told me last year when I spoke with him that he never intended that he would actually drive at Sebring. He would have loved to drive, but he was the team manager, not really one of its drivers. But he put himself down as a reserve driver on the entry forms. He really did it just for a laugh, just so that he would see his own name in the program. Well, one of the contracted drivers at the last minute backed out, didn't show up, and it left a seat open for Fred Gamble. So Fred started the race. When the Jim Jeffords car got damaged, when the engine got damaged and wouldn't rev above 5,000, Fred was called in and directed to turn his healthy car over to Jim Jeffords and the star driver lineup. Initially, Fred thought, well, that stinks. This is the end of my Sebring drive, which he was enjoying very much. Lee Lilly, who was the team's chief mechanic, said to Fred, well, the other car is still running. If you want to get in it and trudge around, don't rev it over 5,000 RPM and might hold up a little while, and you can drive a little bit until the engine blows up. Fred Gamble got in the other car, drove very conservatively. That car never missed a beat, and driving solo, finished the entire 12-hour race. To my knowledge, I believe he's only the second person in history to drive the entire 12 hours of Sebring by himself.
Wow.
Nowadays, and for many years, that's not even permissible anymore for obvious safety reasons. They don't want exhausted drivers out there driving the race solo. So that was quite an accomplishment for Fred Gamble. The other car also finished the race but had some mechanical problems. The car that Fred drove suffered a fuel line failure. One of the lines broke. They sourced a replacement fuel line out of a production car that was in the parking area. They borrowed a fuel line, put it in the car. Fred finished. That evening after the race, they gave the fuel line back to the Corvette owner who loaned it to them.
Wow.
The next morning, one of the team mechanics got in that car to move it. It was in a warehouse on the Sebring property that Camoradi had rented for the team. He cranked the engine. There was no fuel line, so the fuel pump sprayed fuel all over, and it caught fire, and that car burned to the ground. It was destroyed by fire.
Wow.
So only one car survived Sebring. That's how they ended up with one car at Le Mans in June.
How did that car do at Le Mans then?
Well, that car is one of only two cars to finish the race at Le Mans. It ran a conservative pace. Fred Gamble drove the car with Lee Lilly. By that time, Fred and Lee were a little bit at odds with one another. Fred was more interested in finishing the races, all the races, and Lee Lilly was more interested in hammering the car and trying to go as fast as he possibly could. And that reached a little bit of a pitch at Nürburgring, where Lee was really flying in the car, and Nürburgring was then, as now, one of the most difficult circuits in the world because of its length and its elevation changes, and a lot of it is on public roads, and the roads are rough in places. Lee Lilly ended up breaking a wheel bearing by getting airborne in a certain area of that circuit where the car was pitched sideways a little bit, got up airborne, and would come down and really slam the suspension and load up the wheel bearings unreasonably, and it broke one of the front wheel bearings, and that was the end of their race at the Nürburgring. So Fred Gamble was adamant and almost physically threatened Lee Lilly, we are going to run a conservative race here. And they did finish. They finished in 10th overall position, which was a remarkable accomplishment, of course, for a solid axle Corvette. It's the first year that Corvette ever participated at Le Mans. And of course, we all are familiar with the Cunningham team cars, the three team cars. Two of those cars didn't finish. Their third car, of course, won the class in the hands of John Fitch and Bob Grossman. So two of the four Corvettes entered finished, and one of those was the Camoradi car.
There you go. All right, buddy. It's time for our final break. When we get back, we're going to talk about what happened to the Camoradi Corvette after Le Mans, coming up next on Corvette Today.
Are you ready for a better insurance policy without the Corvette tax? With agreed value protection, the value of your collector vehicle will never change. Plus, you'll save money. Get a quick quote at ncminsurance.com.
Hey, honey, are you awake?
I am now.
I can't sleep. Since turning 50, I keep dreaming of a red door and a blue door, somehow knowing there are only choices for retirement.
Okay.
Through the red door, we outlive our money. We have to rely on our kids. We're stuck on a fixed income. It's terrifying.
Yeah, that would suck.
But through the blue door, our money outlives us. We retire on our terms. Our kids stay our kids, not our caretakers. We make work optional.
Yes, that's much better. That's what I want too. But what do we do?
We call True Wealth & Company at 913-653-8783. They specialize in helping successful people make work optional. They're our fiduciary Blue Door personal wealth managers.
Hey, where are you going? It's 3 a.m.
I can't sleep. I'm going to check out True Wealth & Company online at retirewithtrue.com. That Blue Door is going to be our retirement.
913-653-8783. Visit us online at retirewithtrue.com. Investment advice offered through True Wealth & Company, LLC, a registered investment advisor in the state of Kansas.
VetFinders.com is the Internet's original Corvette classified ads website, with classified ads starting at just $25. And every ad runs until your Corvette is sold. If you're in the market for a Corvette, VetFinders.com has over 500 Corvettes for sale from all around the USA and Canada and covering all 8 generations. Visit VetFinders.com, the Internet's destination for buying and selling Corvettes. That's VETTE Finders.com.
Rev up your ride with the ultimate upgrade. The Radiator Grill Store is your go-to destination for top-notch C8 Corvette Stingray, Z06, and E-Ray accessories. Elevate your style with custom-painted engine bay covers, sleek front splitters, and side skirts that scream sophistication. Keep your C8 protected with premium Radiator Grill screens. Stand out from the crowd at car shows and beyond. Use code CT10 for an exclusive 10% discount off your total purchase at RadiatorGrillStore.com. Don't miss out on turning heads. Upgrade your Corvette today.
You're enjoying the only current podcast on Corvettes, Corvette Today.
Thanks once again for listening and watching Corvette Today, the show that talks about everything Corvette. Corvette Today is brought to you by Wheelcraft. You want your Corvette looking its best, don't you? Well, dress it up with bright chrome or black chrome wheels. Visit wheelcraft.com and learn about their advanced PVD chrome finishing. They can refinish your wheels or do a wheel exchange, and you get a 5-year warranty too. So visit wheelcraft.com today or give them a call. 833-639-4231. I'm your host, Steve Garrett. With me is my buddy, Richard Prince, the official photographer of Corvette Racing. We are talking about the Camoradi Corvette from Le Mans in 1960. In this final segment, we're going to talk about what happened to that car after Le Mans. Richard, a Corvette enthusiast named Lauren Lundberg started searching for the Camoradi Corvette, and ironically, it had been crashed on the way from Sweden to a race in England. Talk about that crash and what happened to the car.
Well, yes, that's correct, Steve. The car was raced in Sweden on a circuit called Karlskoga. The day after that race, a Swedish Formula One driver named Joe Bonnier drove the car to several new Swedish national speed records for production cars on public roads. It became quite famous in Sweden. Joe Bonnier was Sweden's first Formula One driver, the first Swedish Formula One driver to win an F1 race. So he was quite famous. The car became quite famous. And after Bonnier drove it to the new speed records, Fred Gamble, the team manager, and the team's mechanic at that point, a guy named Bob Wallace, were scheduled to bring the car to England, to Goodwood, for the next race to indicate what big-time sports car racing was like back then. They didn't own a transport truck or even a trailer.
Wow.
So the car went from one race to the next under its own power. So Bob Wallace was driving the Corvette, and Fred Gamble was in the support vehicle, which was a Ford station wagon that was full of tools and some spares. And unfortunately, while still in Sweden, Bob Wallace fell asleep at the wheel of the Corvette, went off the road, went into a ditch. The car rolled several times and ended up back on its wheels, but it was effectively destroyed. It was a mess. Bob Wallace went off to the hospital, checked out okay. He had no injuries. He was just bruised and bumped up a little bit. The car got towed to a local repair shop in this small town in Sweden. Fred Gamble and Bob Wallace looked at it, realized that it was hopeless. The car was gone. They took the engine and transmission out of it, and they gave the remains to the policeman who had shown up at the accident scene and written the report.
Wow.
And they assumed that he would maybe keep a few pieces off of it as souvenirs, or maybe make a few dollars selling pieces of the car to locals, because, again, it had become somewhat famous all of a sudden in Sweden as this new national speed record holder.
Yeah.
So that was the end of the Corvette. The team was still racing with Maseratis through the end of the year. By the end of 1960, Camoradi itself was nothing but a distant memory. The team disbanded, and everybody went their separate ways.
Wow. Now, Loren Lundberg found the owner of the car in 1994. I know he wrote to him expressing interest in buying the car. What happened with all that then, Richard?
Well, how Loren Lundberg got to that car is an absolutely unbelievable and fascinating story. Loren Lundberg was a passionate Corvette enthusiast. He lived in a town called Glendale, Arizona. In, I believe it was 1990, Loren was asked to help put together a display for an NCRS show, a Southwest Regional NCRS show, and was given the task of putting together a historic Corvette race car display. So on his list of people to contact was a man named Mike Pillsbury. Mike Pillsbury lived in California, and he owned one of the 1960 Cunningham Le Mans Corvettes, which he had found in a salvage yard in California, recognized that it was a big brake, heavy-duty brake, 37-gallon fuel tank Corvette that had done some serious racing. He researched it, discovered that it was one of the Cunningham Le Mans entries, and he restored that car. So Loren called him to see if he'd be willing to bring the car for this Southwest Regional NCRS display. And in the course of the conversation, Pillsbury said, you live in Glendale, Arizona. That's pretty close to Phoenix, isn't it? Yeah. Well, you must know Bob Wallace. Loren Lundberg said, I don't. Who's Bob Wallace? And Pillsbury said Bob Wallace was one of the mechanics for the Camoradi team at Le Mans in 1960, and he's got a shop in Phoenix, Arizona. You ought to go see him. He's probably an interesting guy. So after Camoradi disbanded at the end of 1960, Bob Wallace went to work for an Italian team racing Ferraris, and in 1964, he went to work for Lamborghini. Initially as a mechanic, he quickly became their chief test driver and was a very influential person at Lamborghini. He had a direct role in every vehicle that Lamborghini created from 1964 until he left the company. He left in 1975 when Ferruccio Lamborghini sold the company. Bob Wallace didn't want to stay on, so he quit. And he and his wife considered staying in Italy. They considered going back home. He was a Kiwi originally. Out of the blue, he and his wife decided that they would go across the ocean and move to the United States of America. They literally looked at a map and thought, well, Arizona looks good. It's warm, it's dry, there's a strong car culture there. And he intended to open an independent repair shop specializing in Lamborghinis and Ferraris. So he and his wife moved to Phoenix in 1975. And Loren Lundberg lived 10 miles away, coincidentally. So Loren did, in fact, at Mike Pillsbury's suggestion, go see Bob Wallace. And Bob Wallace pulled a photo of the wrecked Corvette out of his desk drawer and says, this is the last time I saw the Camoradi Corvette. He told Loren the story. It crashed. We gave it to the cop, and I'm sure it was thrown away. And Loren said, but are you sure? How do you know it was just scrapped? And Bob Wallace said, well, actually, I don't know. I just assume it was. Look at it. It was a disaster. Loren said, well, maybe it didn't get thrown away. And Bob Wallace said, if you're really interested, go find Fred Gamble. He really would be the key. He ran the team, and he knows more about the car and about the program than anybody. Bob Wallace had not stayed in touch with Fred Gamble, didn't know where he was. The only thing he remembered was that Gamble was a ski advocate, very passionate about skiing, and he thought he ended up in Colorado doing something with skiing. So with that little clue, Loren Lundberg was off and running. Of course, this was before the internet, so you couldn't put people's name in a search engine and find where they were.
Right.
He had to do things the old-fashioned way with the telephone and letter writing. Over the next 4 years, he was absolutely relentless and would not let any little lead or any little clue go. It was just an absolutely unbelievable sequence of events that led Loren to find the car. The car did, in fact, survive. The shop owner kept it for a little while. He sold it to a guy who attempted to put it back together. That guy got the car basically running and driving again. He had it for some number of years and ultimately sold it to another Swede. And that man took the car apart and was planning to do a better quality restoration and got no further than taking the car apart. So it was disassembled through, again, an unbelievable, unlikely sequence of events and strange coincidences. Lauren Lundberg contacted everybody from the Swedish embassy to local police jurisdictions throughout Sweden to a Swedish member of the Chrysler Town and Country Club who his brother was acquainted with, found Fred Gamble through a letter to the editor that Fred had written to Road and Track magazine.
Wow.
Lauren ended up greatly helped by a young policeman in Sweden who was a car enthusiast who took all the information Lauren had put together and invested a great deal of his time and effort and actually found the car. It was in Stockholm, in a garage, disassembled. Thankfully, it was essentially all there. The first man who had put the car back together, he just literally put it back together. He glued back, bonded back together all of the shattered pieces of the original body. When Lauren found the car, it still had its original chassis, what was left of its original shattered body, its heavy-duty brake and suspension setup, its very, very special 37-gallon fiberglass fuel tank that was created by Chevrolet Engineering. The only significant pieces missing were the engine and transmission, which Bob Wallace and Fred Gamble had taken out of the car after the crash. And, of course, Lauren set out to try to find those pieces, too. The transmission disappeared, and he could not determine what happened to it. The engine for the Corvette ended up in a Maserati Grand Prix car.
Wow.
And that's another interesting story. The Maserati Grand Prix car was owned by a New Zealander who had sent it to an agent in Italy. And the agent was supposed to be an intermediary between the car owner and the Maserati factory and was supposed to forward the car on to the factory and supervise its rebuild there. Instead, he had Fred Gamble and Bob Wallace install the Corvette engine into it, modify it to accept the Corvette engine, and then he sold the car to another New Zealand racer. So he sold a car he didn't own and had no right to sell.
Wow.
The man who bought the car crashed it, totaled the car, and the engine was taken out again and put into an offshore racing boat. That boat ultimately sank with the engine. So the original engine for the Camoradi car is at the bottom of the ocean off the coast of New Zealand.
Wow. That's crazy. All right, so Lauren Lundberg bought the car. Talk about the process of purchasing it and then getting it back to the United States.
Well, again, this was pre-internet, and Lauren Lundberg was not in the import-export business, so it was quite complicated. He had a lot to learn, and, of course, he had to trust people who were literally up the other side of the ocean. He found the car. He contacted the man who owned it. The man was willing to sell it. Lauren never told me how much he paid for the car, but he described the asking price as shocking, given the condition of the car. But, of course, he'd been searching. This was into his fifth year at that point, and he finally found this treasure. He certainly was not going to let it go because the price was too high. So he organized a trip with his wife and a couple of friends. They went to Europe. They went to Sweden. He looked at the car, confirmed that it was, in fact, the car. In fact, he took photos back to Bob Wallace and had Bob Wallace examine and confirm that it was, in fact, the car. Lauren also, at that point, had, I believe, paperwork from the ACO showing the chassis number for the Camoradi car, which also further confirmed that it was, in fact, the car. So Lauren bit the bullet and ponied up the asking price, and he bought the car, and then had to arrange to ship it back to the U.S., and adding to the difficulty of that was the fact that the car was disassembled. So it was very hard to move a car that couldn't roll under its own power, and there were parts everywhere. And once again, the police officer who had helped him find the car was of tremendous help. Lauren went home, and the police officer helped supervise the gathering of all the parts, the packaging of everything, and the loading of the car. It was put into a shipping container and trucked initially from Sweden to Germany, and in Germany it was loaded on a cargo ship. Off it went to the port of Long Beach in California. Lauren, with a group of his friends, had towed a trailer to the port of Long Beach to pick the car up. They did. The DSR Asia was the name of the cargo ship, and when that reached California, Lauren and his buddies were there to take delivery.
Wow.
Lauren loaded it up on his open car trailer, drove across the state of California, across the desert, and halfway across Arizona to get to Glendale. It was, at that point, 45 years and 5,500 miles later, after the car had left the United States, that it came home.
That's amazing. Now, unfortunately, Lauren died in 2021. What happened to the Camoradi Corvette after that?
Well, Lauren restored the car in his own garage with his own two hands after he bought it. It took him several years.
Wow.
He absolutely adored the car, and he adored sharing the story about the car with others. So he was a regular participant in NCRS events and Carlisle and other Corvette shows around the country. He loved that car right up until the day he died in 2021. Shortly thereafter, his family decided to sell the car, and a man named Dominic Testa, a New Yorker, bought it. He'll readily tell you that he didn't fully understand what he was getting involved with when he bought the car. He just knew that it was a Le Mans race car and that it was on the road and ready to go. He thought it would be fun. He's a Corvette enthusiast. He's got several other Corvettes and has been a car enthusiast his whole life. It just sounded like an adventure to him. When he went to pick the car up, he was surprised when Lauren's widow said, "Oh, I've got a bunch of boxes of stuff for this car. I'm just going to throw it out, so if you have any interest in it, please take it." Dominic was shocked by about a dozen file boxes stuffed full. Lauren had saved every stitch of paper, every single thing that he had gotten related to the car. Photographs, Chevrolet engineering documents, ACO documents, race entry forms, race result forms, every bit of correspondence, all related to his search for the car, the police report from the initial accident.
Wow.
It was just unbelievable, and Dominic was overwhelmed, then realized that he had bought far more than just a car. He had bought an epic story. He brought the car back to New York. This was about 27 or so years after Lauren had bought the car and restored it. The car was showing its age again. Dominic decided it deserved a complete and thorough and high-quality restoration, so he brought it to a place called JTM Motorsports here on Long Island, which has great expertise in vintage car restoration and Corvette specialists. JTM did a 100% body-off-the-chassis restoration, returning the car to exactly the configuration it was in at Le Mans in 1960.
That's an incredible story.
It really is. Let me say this. I've been writing and photographing Corvettes for about 33 years. I long ago lost count of how many magazine stories I've written, but it's somewhere between 2,500 and 3,000 magazine stories.
Wow.
And I can say with certainty that I have never written a more interesting story about a more unbelievable car. Just the fact that this car survived is unbelievable in and of itself. And then this incredible sequence of events that brought Lauren Lundberg in contact with the car is equally unbelievable. And his utterly relentless pursuit of it, he just would not give up, trying to learn the disposition of the car. And when he found out the car was still alive, he had to have it. He brought it back to the U.S. It is really an unbelievably fascinating story.
It really is. Richard, thank you so much for coming back on Corvette Today. This has been an epic, epic story.
Well, thank you, Steve. As I said at the beginning of our discussion today, I know I speak for everybody in the Corvette hobby and in the Corvette community when I say that we deeply appreciate all that you've done to enhance our enjoyment of Chevrolet sports car, a car that we all love very, very much.
Thanks again for listening and watching Corvette Today. And be sure to tell your family, friends, and other Corvette enthusiasts about the Corvette Today show. And thanks to our sponsors, Wheelcraft. Want to dress up your Corvette with bright chrome or black chrome wheels? Visit wheelcraft.com to learn about their advanced PVD chrome finishing. They can refinish your wheels or offer a wheel exchange for most models, and it comes with a 5-year warranty. Visit wheelcraft.com today or call 833-639-4231. Soul Performance Products at SOULPP.com, the official performance exhaust of Corvette Today. Ciocca Corvette at CIOCCA Corvette.com. E5 Wheels at E5Wheels.com. True Wealth and Company at retirewithtrue.com. Also, Aerolarri Wheels, get $100 off your purchase with the new promo code CT111 at aerolarri.com. And Hendrick Chevrolet in Kansas City at chevyusa.com.
Thanks for checking out Corvette Today on podcast and YouTube. If you'd like to contact Steve with ideas for Corvette Today, you can email him at stevegarrettdj@gmail.com. Garrett has 2 R's and 2 T's. That's stevegarrettdj@gmail.com. Also, sign up for email notifications at corvettetoday.ck.page. Follow Steve and the show on social media on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Threads at Steve Garrett DJ. Thanks again for listening and watching Corvette Today.